Good evening, good evening. Hello everyone, welcome to the Other Palace, the home for all things musical theatre and the latest addition to Andrew Lloyd Webber's portfolio of venues to ensure that we're doing our bit to keep the genre of musical theatre alive and kicking here in London. Yes! My name is Paul Taylor-Mills and I have the absolute honour of being the artistic director here at the Other Palace. And you join us here tonight and hopefully live on the set of La Strada. This is Sally Cookson's beautiful adaptation of the famous Fellini film, which is here till Saturday, July the 8th. So do come and see it. We're really lucky to have it here. So the Live at the Other Palace is one of our many initiatives here at the Other Palace. This one specifically curated by Andrew with a view to giving our audience an opportunity to get an insight into the lives and work of some of theatre's most influential figures. For those of you watching at home, we're really, really excited about you engaging with us tonight, so please do comment just below the live feed, and I'll try and read out as many questions as possible. But now, on to tonight's main event. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving the warmest round of applause for Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Well, welcome again to the Other Palace, and it is a fantastic privilege for me tonight to introduce somebody who I idolised when I was some of your ages down at the front there. One of the greatest names in the history of musical theatre. I'm not going to waffle around or say anything more about him because he really needs no introduction, but I am going to say that he has won 21 Tony Awards, because otherwise he'll tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, Harold Prince. I think before we get started, I should just explain how I met Hal, or how I very nearly met Hal, back in 1970, in October 1970, when I had just finished Jesus Christ Superstar, and it had just come out as a record in New York. And I didn't get a telegram from Hal, which read, and I can remember it, it said, "I am the man behind Fiddler on the Roof, West Side Story and Cabaret, and I'm interested in the rights of Jesus Christ Superstar." And now this telegram, I don't know where it went, but I didn't get it till I was back in England, and by that time we'd signed to Robert Stigwood, and it was too late. So I had to say to Hal, unfortunately, it wasn't around anymore, and I often wonder how my career would have changed if Hal had directed and produced it rather than the absolutely appalling production that came on in New York, which and I still try and live down. But 5 years later, I was involved with a musical called Jeeves, which was one of the most legendary catastrophes, and had the misfortune of following Hal's production of A Little Night Music, and I was therefore quite surprised to get a letter from Hal, and I sort of opened it rather sort of shaking and thinking, what's he going to say? And in that letter was one of the most encouraging letters I've ever received. It just said, Andrew, he said, there's nice music in this. I would bank that score. Very few words, if I may say. And also, you can't listen to a musical if you can't look at it. So I called Hal, who was staying at the Savoy Hotel, and he very sweetly asked me to come round to have a drink. And Hal said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about writing a musical with Tim Rice about the life of Eva Peron." And Hal said, "Well, if you ever finish it, come and see me with it first." And I did, and it's something that changed my life. So, Hal, that's my little spiel about the introduction.
Well, I two things. One, he doesn't know that the telegram about to get the rights to Jesus Christ Superstar included the name Michael Bennett as a stager. Yes, because the two of us thought that was a grand idea. So you missed out on both of us. Sorry, boys.
But you don't know that Michael Bennett staged the whole of Mr. President for me, Irving Berlin musical, in my drawing room when he came over to see Cats in 1981. And he came back afterwards and he did the whole show. So I did get to meet Michael Bennett.
Fair enough.
But Hal, just because there are loads of people here who I'm sure would love to hear, how did you get into musical theatre, and will you tell us about George Abbott?
Well, yeah, I went to the university and I took a liberal arts education. There was no theater course there, and much less a theater degree, none of that stuff. So I hung out mostly in extracurricular land, working on student theater in college, writing and directing plays. I had no interest remotely in musicals. I thought they were silly. And you know, they were silly. I'm going to digress for a second. My favorite plot of a musical of my contemporary time was something called Something for the Boys. And it was an Ethel Merman, who was one of our greatest stars. She starred in it, and it had a Cole Porter score. So it was a huge success. The plot, however, it took place during World War II, was about how Merman got some graphite on her teeth, and German Nazi spies figured out that they could get messages out on her teeth. Big hit. So I really wanted to do dramas, serious dramas. But what happened was I was very terrified about looking for work, so I wrote letters. And one of the letters was to probably the busiest producer, playwright, and director on Broadway, George Abbott, who lived to 107. By the time I went to work for him, he was in his late 80s, and I was exactly 20. And he befriended me. He thought I had something going. And in any case, he did primarily musicals. So having been there and sitting there, I thought, God, you can't hate musicals. You might as well learn everything there is to know about the musical business and how you direct a musical and all the rest of it. So I did, and in that way got into musicals. And a very interesting thing happened. Popular music was theater music. And so consequently, the very first show I produced was The Pajama Game. And there was a song called Hey There. And our first public performance, preview, in Boston, way before getting to New York, that was the #1 song in the country before the curtain went up on our show. So the audience was sort of humming along the #1 song, and the show was in its first performance. All that changed when music changed, and popular music became, rock and roll, R&B, and so all that stuff. And that opened the door to more interesting subjects. And we all took advantage of that. You were able to direct the musical into places like Evita.
But
now,
I do remember, though, you telling me that one of the things that really changed your view on musical theatre was seeing South Pacific.
Oh, well, for sure.
Because that was 1948.
Yep.
And, I mean, Rodgers and Hammerstein did, in a way, change things.
They changed. Well, their section, the Rodgers and Hammerstein era, was a huge sea change in the history of musicals. Everything before then had been what I was describing before, silly, mindless musicals with great scores, great Gershwin scores, Lady Be Good, but plots you couldn't describe for a minute. Then came Rodgers and Hammerstein, and of course, I'm glad you reminded me. That changed everything. Oklahoma was spectacular. Carousel was even more spectacular in my mind because a more serious subject and so on. And then there was
South Pacific.
South Pacific, and that was that was instrumental in making me love musicals. But by then, by the way, I was working at George Abbott's office. I just started, and I knew I was very lucky. The theater was quite different in those days from now. I don't speak for England. I'm speaking from the United States. It was a real community, and no matter you came in at the age of 25, I was when I did Pajama Game. You met everyone. Anyone you ever dreamed of meeting, you met, and they were nice to you, and they remembered your name, which is not currently the way things are. And but also the theater. I know, sitting in London, you know, the theater is still so paramount as an art form. It hasn't that degree of central importance as films and television do in our country. So that's a loss.
But you became a great friend of Oscar Hammerstein.
Well, Richard Rodgers.
And
really.
Rodgers, yes.
Richard Rodgers was terrific to me. And the whole Rodgers family were terrific. They took me to the opening night of South Pacific, where Oscar Hammerstein's family took Steve Sondheim. And somebody said, Hal, you know Steve. Steve, you know Hal. And we didn't know each other, but we did get to know each other.
So it was South Pacific then where you met?
Yeah, on the opening night of South Pacific.
And I remember you saying that one of the things that struck you about South Pacific was that it was seamless in its staging.
Well, yes, and that owes a lot to Joshua Logan, who was its director. It was the first time. I had been a stage manager, by the way, briefly before I became a producer. And in those earlier musicals, you did a scene with some songs, and then a traveler, a curtain closed, and the conductor played utility music, and a little light went on when the scenery was changed back of the curtain, and then the curtain went up and the show went on. And you were used to that. That was the standard everywhere. Suddenly, in this show, it was continuous, absolutely seamless. And what he did was he put some travelers that you could see through, scrims, and action. When a scene changed, these two scrims went all the way across the stage. People moved. Small, short scenes took place downstage, some between the two scrims, and backstage work was happening. So it was like much more like a movie. And you realized when you saw that show that you could direct a musical a little bit more like a movie than anyone had. Andrew mentioned Evita. It is one of my favorite musicals by far, probably one of the 2 or 3 favorite musicals I've been associated with. Well, that's a show that depends on close-ups, just like a movie.
Well, of course, Evita was a very, very simple set.
That's the point.
It was a black box, really.
I love black boxes. You know, let me say this to you. Phantom of the Opera is a black box. It's a shiny black enamel box. It gets so expanded about how it's a huge amount of scenery. Not at all, you know. Go back and look at it. The proscenium's probably the most elaborate piece of scenery in the whole show. And then there's a beautiful table or a chair or something. But it's spare, and you're always aware of empty spaces. Mostly always aware.
Going back, West Side Story, how did you get involved?
Well, Steve was a good friend. And he was writing it with Bernstein and Arthur Lawrence, and Jerry Robbins was sort of commanding it. And I was working on a show called New Girl in Town, based on a Eugene O'Neill play. We won't talk about it much. Curiously enough, it was a success at the box office. nowhere else, though. In any case, I was in Boston struggling with it. It was our second show, and Steve called from New York, and I told him all my troubles. Oh, God, yes, I told him all my troubles. And then somewhere near the end of the second hour, I said, "Oh, and how are you?" And he said, "I thought you'd never ask. We have no show." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We've lost our producer and the whole show's off." And I said, "We're off on Sunday. We can't rehearse on Sunday. My partner and I will fly to New York. Can you arrange an audition of the score? And we'll hear it, and we'll see whether we can't take it over." Steve had played the entire score of West Side Story for me, and he said, "But hey, Hal, don't give away that you've heard it. Lenny never wanted anyone to hear a note of that score." And I said, "Okay, fine." So we went to the Osborne where Bernstein lived, and the authors and director were there, and Bernstein played the piano very nervously, pounded. You've never heard a piano. I'm surprised it held up under it. And Steve sang the lyrics with him, and neither fella could sing, by the way, not remotely. Nevertheless, they did it. And it was so dynamic and so damned exciting, of course. But then somewhere in the middle of it, I started to hum, inadvertently. And Lenny heard me, and Lenny stopped. And I thought, "Oh, God, what now?" And Lenny said, "That's what I've always wanted, a producer who is musical."
And how was West Side received critically initially?
Well, less than thrillingly. It was the reviews. I looked at them the other day because it was an event. And somebody showed me the reviews, and I thought they were terrible. We all thought they were terrible. They weren't. They were cold. They said it was icy and very extremely well made and erudite and all that stuff. The hit that year was Wilson's
Music Man.
Music Man. It won all the awards. We didn't win them.
Extraordinary thing to think on Tony Award Day that West Side Story did not win the Tony Award.
No, not at all. We didn't. No, we won one. Jerry won for dance because they never stopped dancing. You know? But otherwise, no, we didn't win any. And I went to the Tony Award by myself. Sat at a table for 10 because we bought a table, and none of the other team showed up. So there was a nice table for 10 with Guy alone at it, and we didn't pick up much.
But when did it take off?
Well, what happened was we ran it pretty well. Also, the theater was a different place then. You didn't have to. You could, for most of 25 years of my career in the theater, you could return an investment on 60% capacity of a show. You got very sad.
Yes, I got looking very
No, but it's true. And so it's a different business. So, of course, we returned the investment. We ran a little under 2 years, but they bought the film rights. And this has happened to me twice in my career. The show is a success. It returned its investment. Oh, by the way, I'm going to interrupt myself to tell you that there were about 200 walkouts almost every night.
Really?
Wow.
Really?
And I would stand like a jackass in the back of the theater in the aisle saying, "No, you really shouldn't leave." In any case, in the interim years between the time the show closed on Broadway and the time the film was made, in some magical way, a public is educated to accept a work of art.
I mean, I remember when it was at Her Majesty's Theatre, I think it was, when I was, I must be about 11 or 12, I suppose then. I remember it making a huge impression on me, and I remember a lot of my friends saying, this is the first and only musical that they actually liked. And so it must have at that time...
Well, yes, we were very well received in London, and we did kind of very generously. Equity allowed us to bring a total American cast. And the arrangement was this, and you'll see how smart Equity was in this respect. They said, you can bring the American cast, but you've got to send back 1 or 2 members every week and replace them with British people, so that by the time the show is 6 months old, it'll be a complete British cast. But here's the real caveat. You have to have dance classes twice a week for anyone who wants them to appear at the theater, Her Majesty's, to study the Jerome Robbins technique, because we don't have any clue of what that's like. And so really, I suspect it's affected dance movement historically in London forever.
But certainly when I was a kid, that was the show that you talked about. And I mean, I remember when I was a kid that Rodgers and Hammerstein in London, among the sort of, as it were, chattering classes, as it were a bit of a joke. I mean, you didn't take, they were sort of sentimental. And I remember it's funny you talking about Carousel, but Lonnie Price, who we both know, who directed the Sunset Boulevard just recently for me, and has just done Carousel in London, he gave me a book of Rodgers and Hammerstein's productions with the reviews at the back. And the reviews of Carousel in London literally were horrifying.
They dismissed it.
Yeah, they just said this serious subject, what Rodgers and Hammerstein's answer to taking a serious subject like this is to smother it with treacle. Well, that was John Barber, who became the Daily Telegraph's major critic.
I knew him.
Yeah, so there you go. But how?
I'm sorry.
There you go. But when did you decide, what was the first show you directed?
The first show I directed, and you don't know this, we're learning a lot about each other. I did a production of The Matchmaker. The very first play I directed was a play, and it was The Matchmaker, Thornton Wilder's wonderful play, and it did very well on tour. It did not get to Broadway, but it was the New York State Arts Council, and it went everywhere, and people said, hey, that's good. And it had a wonderful cast. So David Merritt came to me and asked me to direct Hello, Dolly. And Jerry Herman came to the office and played Hello, Dolly. And I said, well, it's swell, but what the hell is Hello, Dolly doing in the show? I mean, this woman has never been to the Harmonia Gardens. What do they mean it's so swell to have you back where you belong? And so I started to lecture him on this show, and I turned him down. Instead, I did She Loves Me. She Loves Me was much more like The Matchmaker than Hello, Dolly ever was. It was small and intimate, and I did it. I did it well, I think. It never was a huge success, though it's lasted in the literature of theater. And we played in London at the Apollo, I think, and had a run for it, with Rita Moreno getting the Evening Standard Award. In any case, what was your damn question?
Well, how you got into direction.
Oh, yeah, well, all right, that's it. So basically, I got into direction by turning down Hello, Dolly.
And then, the first musical that I saw of yours, which you directed, was Cabaret.
That, Cabaret was the first time I expressed myself. And that's, for a director, it's different than for an author. You can direct a lot of things by honoring the material, and there's a choice a director often has: is do I just submerge myself, disappear into the material, or do I find something in myself that connects me to it, which makes it more personal? And I was doing Cabaret. It was based on the Sally Bowles, the Christopher Isherwood stories, Berlin stories, and a lot of people had, Sandy Wilson had written a musical about it.
I didn't realize that. Did it ever get performed?
No, it didn't. But he was a good composer. It was fun. But he had done the same thing that everyone had done. Was turn it into a giddy musical about a British girl who couldn't sing or dance much, but did both in a cheap cabaret and had a lot of sex and drank too much, and then the Nazis came, sort of, but way in the background somewhere. They didn't affect anybody, and we were Kander and Ebb were writing exactly that show with my encouragement, and I thought, I don't like this show. This isn't coming to grips with any issues at all, and I don't care for it. We're making a mistake having a leading lady dance on tables. And I went to Europe. Actually, I went to Russia with my wife, and I went to the Taganka Theater, and it is still extant, and this is 1964, and we were working on the material for the show, and there was a review called 10 Days That Shook the World, and it shook me. Everything that was happening on that stage was uniquely one man, a guy named Lyubimov's vision. And I thought, oh God, this man is expressing himself in some very major way. And I came back to New York, and I met with the authors, and I said, I want to propose a real change. Some years ago, I was in the Army. I was drafted in the Korean War, but sent to Germany, and 1950-51, and I inhabited a little bar in Stuttgart in the bombed-out basement of a church called Maxime's, and there was a dwarf with lipstick and eyeshadow and fake eyelashes, and he was the MC. And there were three huge Valkyrie ladies who, in butterfly costumes, who would take poses and dance around him. And he would tell these fearful German jokes. Of course, I don't speak German. I just knew they were terrible because no one was laughing. And anyway, I saw that, and all these years later, 1964, I came back and said, let's get this guy in the show, and let's make him what the story's about. And I have a friend, not a dwarf, but a little guy, named Joel Gray, and I want him to come in and audition for you. And he did. And we changed the whole script so that he became the metaphor. And that was my discovery of metaphor in theater.
Yes.
And from then on, I felt like I was a part of, certainly the shows that really worked, I was a part of them. And the metaphor was, of course, in the first act, he was the entertainer. Tragic fellow representing Germany back on its heels, depth of the depression. And the second act, what do you do with a country in the depth of depression to get it back on its feet? Well, Germany made the mistake of going to National Socialism and Adolf Hitler, but that's what the second act did. And when we started that show, there was absolutely nobody on Broadway who thought anything but that we were crazy. But I do believe it did influence the theater in a healthy way.
Was the next show you directed after that Company?
No, Company was 1970. So no, I directed Zorba and then
Yes.
Company. And
But that was the first show of Steve's you
that was the
directed.
first show of Steve's. And that George Firth, who, by the way, I regard as a kind of J.D. Salinger, undiscovered J.D. Salinger. He was a working actor who wrote it brilliantly. Do any of you know Company? Yes. Well, that's a lot of you. That's good. Well, he'd written 7 plays, and for a fashionable actress to play in all 7 of them. And Steve said they want to put them on Broadway, but George thinks there's something wrong with this. And I said, well, let me read them. So I read them, and I thought, well, I'm not paying any attention to the plays at all. I'm backstage watching the leading lady change makeup, wigs, and costumes so she can get on stage for the next play. And I said, that's its real problem. But by the time they came to the office to talk, I said, there's a musical in these, and in 3 of these plays, because they're about marriage, and because they're about how misunderstood interpersonal relationships between 2 people can be when they're observed by other people, because it's such a private thing. And why don't we examine that? And that's how Bobby was invented, and the show essentially moved, as you know, on married couples using a third person to complain about each other. But the minute the third person disappears, they're just fine. And he goes away thinking, that's a terrible marriage. And that was sort of the key to the show. And Steve and I, we had been trying to do shows for years. This time, I did work with Steve. I did A Funny Thing Happen as his producer, and I did. But this time we actually worked together, and it was good.
And the next was Follies.
Follies was a year later. And actually, Follies, he brought me first. And I said, no, I want to do the other one first, and then we'll do Follies. And Follies being done now.
Yes, indeed.
At the National.
I remember seeing Follies at the Winter Garden, I think it was, on Broadway.
You bet.
And I remember this extraordinary imagery of these ghosts of these performers at the back of the stage, which sort of leads me, and also to talk about Little Night Music, which of course was extraordinary to look at. I don't know if anybody remembers the original production, which I think was at the Adelphi. But a fantastic visually. It leads me to want to ask you about that point you made to me about Jeeves, which you've made many, many times to me subsequently, about how you can't really listen to music, you can't really appreciate a production if the production looks wrong, because I think it's something you've said to me many times.
You know, because we've worked so well together, I put a great deal of stock in scenery, or the absence of scenery. But basically, what is the production going to look like? Because that motivates the whole motor of the show, how it's going to move, how you're going to tell your story. And you need to know that. In the case of A Little Night Music, this was based on a movie that took place in hallways of a fancy country house with doors slamming and people taking each other to bed and escaping and all the rest of it. And the whole thing, how in hell do you do that on the stage? Well, Boris Aronson, who was one of the greatest designers of all time, and with whom I did a lot of shows, including Follies and Company, solved it brilliantly. Because what he did was he gave me the front of the country house against the back wall, and then green grass rolling down towards the footlights, and then all the interior furniture in the house on that green grass. and it was thrilling because you could play a scene outside in the garden and play a scene in the bedroom, and the audience got it all, no problem at all. But that, unless you can unlock something like that, you're in terrible trouble.
I suppose all of us can remember productions of opera that we've been to see, and we thought, well, that didn't quite work. And then you go and you see another production of it, and it works fantastically. And it all does come down, in my view, to the visuals actually going like this and connecting. And I mean, I always think that the extraordinary thing about the Phantom of the Opera is that it's your vision and Maria Bjornsson's design, and the fact that it moves completely seamlessly, and it's so feminine in a way, and it just enmeshes with the music in a way that I don't believe, if it had been another production, that it would be here 30 years later. So I think it's a really fascinating point that Hal's making, that a production must look right and
you have
fit
to
the
know,
material.
you have to become, well, for a director, you absolutely have to be comfortable with what it's going to look like. Evita's one of my favorite examples because it's so spare, you say, well, there's nothing there. Aha. However, what's it about? Of course it's about this woman, and of course it's about the man she found, and of course it's about power. But it's really about a change in the history of the world when flashlight bulbs, film, microphones, all those converged on history to make people explode into gigantic sizes and become mythical. And the show, I think the brilliance of the material is it examines that huge image on the screen that is mythical and the real human being who is vulnerable. And now we live, if ever, we live in times when we really don't know who the hell anyone is anymore, thanks to the television and film and all it. And that was the metaphor, was those three things: the flashlight, the microphone, and the sound system, and what that does for people.
Hal, I'm going to ask you one question, and it's a leading question before we throw it open to the floor. But I've got to ask you, have you met Donald Trump?
I asked him to ask me that. No, I met him, and it's very much connected with Andrew as well. I've only met him once, and it was at a preview, believe it or not, of Phantom of the Opera at the Majestic in New York. I think we had 9 previews in each city, yes. And so I was backstage with my wife, and I said, talking to the kids in the company, let's not see the show tonight. Let's dart out through the lobby before they open the doors and go to dinner and then come back afterwards and see them. She said, fine. And we started through the vast lobby of that theater, and the doors, damn it to hell, opened, and the audience came at us. And we were stuck, but my wife, is fleet of foot, I'll tell you. She was out of there somewhere, but I was stuck. And I saw Donald Trump and his then wife, Ivana, coming towards me. And I don't know him. I'd never been in the same room with him before or since. Never seen him again. So we're talking almost 30 years ago in January. Anyway, he came in, the audience knew him, and the lobby was filled. They were all looking at him, and I started away, and a voice from behind me. I'm now almost on the street. The voice says, Hal. And I turn around, and he said, it's Donald, Hal. And he says, Ivana it's Hal. And the poor lady doesn't know who a Hal is. And I thought, well, I have to say something, don't I? And where the hell is my wife by now? And I turn around and I say, oh, hello, is this the first time you've seen the show? And he, being Donald Trump, says, is this the first time? And the audience now is gathering around as in a cockfight or something. and is this the first time? No. We saw it last night, and we saw it the night before, and we saw it twice in London. So I said, oh, that's lovely. Thank you very much. And I turned to leave the theater, and the voice said, Hal! By now the audience is quite quiet because it's interested in the show. And I turn around and he says, Ivana and I are so proud of you. That's our president, folks.
There you go.
And Hal, you spoke about the Broadway community and it feeling like a community. I guess I'm so lucky. I've had incredible mentors and supporters. I see the dear Bill Kenwright's out there who's looking after the production of Evita at the moment. But who is your biggest inspiration?
Oh, it's a lot of people.
A lot of people.
A lot of people. I went to theater first to see Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater production of Julius Caesar. I was 8. Why the hell my parents took me to see that? But I'm grateful. And interestingly enough, you might be interested to know that Orson Welles was only 13 years older than I. He had done Julius Caesar at 21. And it was magnificent. I believe I have not erased a moment of that production. And I went to theater from then regularly. And Saturdays with my parents, and then suddenly by the time I was about 12 years old, I'd go alone or find a friend who was in the theater instead of baseball. And there was a place called LeBlanc's Ticket Agency in the basement of a drugstore on 42nd Street and 7th Avenue. And you'd go down there, and there was a ladder and a big blackboard with the names of all the Broadway shows. And the fellow had chalk, and he would lower the price of the ticket as performance time came, and there were still seats there. So the trick was to stay there until the ticket got to 50 cents. It was upstairs, of course, and then you'd pay, and then you'd run to the theater, and if the theater was near enough, you'd get there for the opening, and if it was up on 52nd Street, you'd miss the opening. But that's how I fell in love with the theater. But I also sat in the balcony for many, many years. I don't know about your country, but we can't get people to sit in the second balcony of any of our theaters.
Really?
And they're some of our most beautiful theaters.
Wow. Here's an interesting question from Gillian. I presume she's talking about Phantom of the Opera. Looking back, is there anything you would do to change the original production?
No.
Nothing. No, Gillian. Nothing.
Listen, I've got to say something. I remember the first preview, at the very end of the first preview, you coming up to me and saying, we're not going to change anything, let's go on holiday.
Did I?
Yeah.
Good.
And we never changed a single thing.
No, there are 2 shows. 2 shows. Both had 9 previews because we found that was sort of a lucky number. Neither show, Evita or Phantom, changed from its first public performance.
Wow.
And I can't say that about a single show I've done.
Wow.
Other than
That is true. I think the only change I think was made to the score of Phantom at all was to give Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again an ending in New York. But that was the only thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And I've conveniently forgotten that. Because
I just remembered
the story. You know?
Here's another one here. You've both had exceptional success together and separately. How do you deal with a project that fails to capture the imagination of both critics and audiences? How do you develop that resilience?
Well, what you do, I hope, when you're writing a show or writing a score, is you write it because you actually passionately want to do it. You don't go into it because you think it's just to keep you occupied. I mean, you write it because you actually want to write it. And there have been several of my shows that haven't worked in various ways, but I don't regret them for a moment. And I think that, I mean, I think back at my recent one, Stephen Ward, that didn't work. But there are many, many things. I think I know one of the reasons why it didn't work, but I don't regret having written it under any circumstance, because if you, as a writer or performer, you have to have things that don't work in order to work out what the things are, and to go on and do the next one. You never think back.
Well answered. I remember vividly that I once said to my 80-year-old mentor, why do you do shows? And he said, oh, simple, to entertain. And I thought to myself, that's never occurred to me. It really never has. What you've just described is all that motivates shows, is what do you want to say in them? What of you is getting expressed? Just simply to say, oh, I do them to entertain. And that's what all those early musicals were about, the ones that I didn't care for.
Yeah, that leads me perfectly on to the next question. It's interesting we're sat here on the day of the Tony Awards, of which Hal's won 21. That's 21 Tony, which is exceptional. What do you think the future of musical theatre is? I know you're about to work on Prince of Broadway, but where do you see the future of musical theatre?
Well, I have to be hopeful and encouraging. There are some artists who really can write. We know them, and they're being recognized. A sort of sad fact that I think you'll agree with. Almost everybody I knew, I think you probably were even younger, made it at 26. That would seem a magical age for Bernstein, Comden and Green, Robbins, Sondheim, me. We were all 26 or thereabouts. Now it's more like 46.
Wow.
And that's a sad thing. And I think that's because of money. Nothing more nor less than money. It costs so damn much to get a show on.
Yeah.
You know, the length of time you work on a show does not in any way affect the quality of the show you're working on. We did show a year, and company was 1 year, Folly's the next, and so on. But that's not possible anymore. Now you have to do a workshop, go somewhere to a regional theater and do it. Not you, but well, I mean, Andrew, you're Andrew. Come on. The simple truth is that that's the way it is for younger people.
Yes, I mean, Hamilton was 6 years, was it not, in development?
I think more.
Yeah.
I think more. By the way, West Side Story, just to start, was 13 years.
Wow. Well,
13 years.
But I remember you saying that George Abbott would always have a meeting the day after an opening about his next show.
Well, yeah, that was good advice. And because he'd say to me, you must have a meeting the day after your opening night and work on the next show, because if the show's a hit, you'll regret that you have to get up that early in the morning, but the hell with it, it's a hit. But if it's not a hit, you'll be so delighted to be in a room with artists creating the next show. And that was good advice, really good. But you really could do a show a year. You started to work in September, and you opened the show in the spring, and then it ran for a year or two or three. The most show ran generally is about 3 years in those days. Wow. That was a long, long run.
But one of the ideas we're trying to develop here with this space is the idea that people do try, without elaborate scenery and costumes, and to actually perfect the material before you get to the point where it goes into a full production. And I do think there is a value in that.
Sure there is. Because
I think if you don't work on the actual material itself, everything else can get in the way. And I think one of the things that has changed, surely now, in the last sort of year, well, certainly in the years I've been working in the theatre, has been computerization and automation. And I mean, now you go into the orchestra or the stalls of a theatre when it's in technicals, and you see 40 people looking into computer screens and not at the stage. And when I started out, I mean, you said, right, we're going to change this scene, or we're going to shift this piece of scenery. Now it's so complicated that if you actually want to change a piece of material, you're told, well, you might be able to do it in 2 days' time when we've reprogrammed everything. And that is a change, isn't it?
Oh, a huge change. When I started in the theatre, Pajama Game, Nammy Ice, they did none of those shows up to West Side Story had a lighting designer. Wow. The chief electrician at the board, and the stage manager would say to his assistant, "Run back and tell him there's a ballad coming. Bring the lights down for the ballad and bring the lights up at the end." And that's how you lit a show. The same, of course, with sound. There was no
sound design. No, I mean, I remember Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway, that the sound was operated by a stagehand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, you know, when we first came to Europe, not to London, but to places like Vienna, the sound system was such, there was a biscuit at every place where there was a stagehand, and so the stage manager would say, warning on cue 13, cue 13, and you heard it from the house. Because it went all over the place. No matter how much he whispered, you heard a whispering, warning on cue 13. Everybody took it nicely, and that was the end of that. But times have changed.
Incredible. I think it's time to take some questions from the room. Any questions here? Hello, the gentleman just here on the side there. Kylie's just come down with a microphone for you.
Could I just ask you to talk about the process of putting the show together? How much went into Kiss of the Spider-Woman before what we saw in London, which then went to Broadway? Because it seemed quite an interesting way of doing an American show here first.
Can you
Talking about, just say it a bit louder.
No, just you've heard it.
You're talking about Kiss of a Spider-Woman, how it's different here and how it was different from when it was on Broadway and in London. Is that right?
Well, how you worked on it in London and then it went to Broadway, because you did it here first, didn't you?
You're correct.
Yeah.
We worked on it in Canada, in Toronto, and where it was a success. And I said to the producer, you can't bring it to Broadway. You have to bring it to London, where it wins the Evening Standard Award, and then we'll go to Broadway. Because of the nature of the material, I felt it had to be accepted somewhere else, and that is exactly what happened. Did we change the show in any intrinsic way? No. There was one number that we didn't have, which was a number for Cheetah called Where You Are, and she was in Marlene Dietrich's white tie and tails with a fedora, and that number, I thought, really disproportionately affected the show in a very good way. Rob Marshall choreographed that number, came in to do it. He then went on to do the movie of Chicago and become a movie director. But basically, he did that number for us, and the guys wrote it. And I thought it, but we did take it to London. And so the London show was pretty much everything that went to Broadway.
Wow. Great, thank you. Just this question, just here, the lady there.
Hi, I just want to know if there is any piece of classical theater, such as Shakespeare or Greek theater, that hasn't already been turned into a musical, that as a producer and a director you would be interested in seeing into a musical. I know you produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, or and there are so many other musicals that are from Shakespeare, but is there anything that hasn't already been done that you
Well, Shakespeare musicals have been the fodder of Shakespeare plays have been the fodder of musicals quite successfully a couple of times. George did The Boys from Syracuse, which was a wonderful big hit, and then there was one that John Guare did, the name of which is now escaping me, but there have been. It's been a good material for musicals. I think there is a number of serious plays that are good material for musicals, particularly more acceptable now than in the old days, because the whole muddy thing between musicals and opera was used to be very important, that you did musicals and they did operas. And we always felt a little bit below the salt at the table because we did musicals and they did operas. Well, that's nonsense. And as directing a musical and opera is exactly the same, the truth is that sung through musical is a form of opera, and then there's operetta, which is that's what Candide is. They're all musical theater. That's what they are, and that's what they should be, and that then invites any kind of material into the musical form.
Brilliant. Other question? Just the gentleman here in the same row.
Thank you. Hi there. Obviously, this being the Tony Awards, and that's been said on multiple occasions today, I was just wondering, as a young composer and actor, what you think the most important thing is in securing a show's longevity and joining the musical theatre canon. Do you think awards and ceremonies and festivals are the way to go about it, or do you think that times are changing and that workshopping is more important?
That's a tough question. Well, isn't
Yes.
it?
It is. I mean, let's face it, awards in any form or any industry, if we must call ours an industry, which I hate, but they are only there to promote that industry. And therefore, they are not a perfect mechanism. As we've already seen, I mean, West Side did not win the Tony Award, but I mean, I think I'd rather be the composer of West Side Story these days than I would be the Music Man, which did. I mean, I hope that answers your question in a way. I mean, clearly there is great value in workshops to perfect your material and to discover how an audience is reacting to them. Of course there is. But there does come a time when you, as the composer or the author, have to say, that's my work, and now it's ready for production. And I think that's a decision you have to make. Award ceremonies are really a sideline because, I mean, look, many of my shows have not won awards and have gone on to do other things. I don't think Jesus Christ Superstar won a single award in Britain at all until it won the Evening Standard Award last year. so don't get discouraged, sir.
Andrew and I are slightly different minds about something. I've been hearing it tonight, and I think it's interesting because it really is, in my mind at least, a result of how much more everything costs. Yeah. Where we're sitting tonight is vital to the theater. The whole process of working without all the money and all the scenery, because you can't get it and the work won't be seen. That's all now. That's reality. And you've got to face reality. The time that I was talking about, which is long since gone, or pretty long since gone, is a time when you could say, we'll do a show a year. It's just not possible anymore. So this has taken its place, and it's a very valid place, and it's probably the only way to get anything first-rate done, because it takes time, no question. I've got a book coming out in the fall, and I suspect this does not pertain to anybody in this room, I'm happy to say. But they asked me what did I want to title it, and I said, let's call it Sense of Occasion. And the reason I'm calling it that very specifically is because that's how I like to feel about the theater and about theater people. I really think they're the most interesting people. I'd rather spend any time with a theater person than a movie actress, a star. If she's talented, great, but you don't have to be talented in that media. And it's just a simple fact of life. You have to be talented to work in the theater. It's a very naked and revealing pursuit. And I do think, in every way, I think Sense of Occasion, the sense of when I was going to theater, and it's still true, I got so excited just anticipating the event. And I'm going to tell you something you don't know, I'll bet. When I first went to theater as a kid, do you know that there's a string quartet playing in the box as you came into the theater and during the intermission and playing you out for a drama?
Not in my time, no.
That's what I mean. And I really remember all that. And it's funny. Why do I remember it? I remember it because it was an event, a part of an event. It's an event to go to theater. Let's keep it that way. That's my passion.
It's a really interesting point. Let's go to this side of the room. The lady just there, on the penultimate row.
Hello, thank you so much for your time. I was just wondering what advice you would give to young theatre makers taking their first steps into the industry as it stands today.
I'm going to need you to.
The lady was talking about young theatre makers and how do they penetrate into the industry today. Come to the other palace is the first way.
I think that's a good answer, by the way. No, I think it's always been difficult to make a career in the theater. Don't you? I think if anyone can talk you out of it, then don't do it. It has to be so much an obsession that no one could ever talk you out of it, and you could never imagine doing anything else with your life than working in the theater.
I think that's fantastic advice. But coming back to the fact that you were a stage manager first, just to amplify that point, I was talking to my old friend Sonia Friedman the other day, who, let's face it, is the producer of the moment. And she was reminding me that she was the stage manager, or one of the assistant stage managers on Wayne Sleep's Dash. And that's how she started. And she was, I mean, we were talking about Wayne, and she said, God, yes, of course, that's what and that's what you have to do. I mean, the most famous people in theatre have all started somewhere backstage. Cameron Mackintosh was a stage manager.
Very same kind of career. It's very important. Actually, it was a wonderful thing to be a stage manager because, of course, you learn what was going on back there right away. And it fed a director very well because you knew what was practical, what was not practical, and avenues of creativity were invited by knowing how that machine works. And over the years, it seems almost we've gotten more and more to the basics. This is it. This is wonderful. I know it's crazy to say this and Phantom of the Opera are related. They are. The fact is, you have to edit out a lot of nonsense and frills and stuff that are immaterial and get to the basic image that you want. And sometimes it's quite expensive and beautiful because it requires beautiful costumes and beautiful pieces of scenery and props. But it's always you always have to think of the bare stage. The show I'm doing, I go in rehearsal on the 5th of July, is pretty much about my career, but I didn't want it to be a review, and I didn't want it to be to read like that, and then he. I want it to be more or less rather what we're talking about tonight. But I've been searching and searching for what a metaphor. I love that damn word. I live for that word, and I finally found it only about 3 months ago. And since you won't be seeing the show for a while, I hope you will be seeing it. What I'm going to do is the audience is coming into the theater, and there's going to be nothing there. No house curtain, no nothing. Just a black box. Peter Brook's empty space. And then we're going to show the audience what you can do to animate an empty space, and then back to an empty space, and then another. And I think that'll make it more than just a review.
You talk about the use of space, but this is a kind of a question from me. Whose idea was the chandelier?
That's in the book.
Well,
is it from the book? Is in the book?
Yeah, the I don't know. I mean, it was the most important thing for me of the whole show was that somehow we started with the chandelier, and that it came up over the audience. I mean, that was where I remember, Hal, when I first talked to you about the Phantom of the Opera, thinking of the Tony Awards. It was at the pre-Tony Award party, where I can't remember what you were nominated for, but I was. I think it might have been A Doll's Life. But I
you would mention that.
Well, no, but I was going to say that I was not nominated for anything, but they were doing a taster of next year's Tonys or something. Anyway, so I was at this thing, and there was a strike of hotel workers going on. And we had, I remember going in there, and everybody was saying, "You don't go to this hotel." And we met, and I remember saying to you that I found this book, and I wanted to do a romantic musical. And that's how we began.
We both were hooked by the romantic musical, and that's where South Pacific comes, because we both adore it. And I think to yourself sometimes, you would think that musicals would be mostly romantic. They're so rarely romantic, it's amazing. Operettas, yes, they were Viennese, they were romantic. But musicals so rarely have ever been romantic. You know, My Fair Lady, Bring Me My Slippers is about the sexiest thing he's ever done. But it's true. They're so rarely. And that's really what bound us to that project.
I remember walking back to the hotel afterwards thinking, I really, really want to do this chandelier moment. And I thought, there's only one man who is a showman enough to do it.
No, it's very important. So it's vital. But I'll tell you what else is vital, is the proscenium. The proscenium is the other vital point, because if you examine the proscenium carefully, and I won't describe it, it was very, very carefully designed, sculptured by Maria Bjornsson to be about sex.
Really?
Yep.
Fascinating.
Sorry about that. I think that's the end of this meeting. I'm kidding.
I think we've got time for one more, so let's make sure it's an absolutely super question to end with this evening. Everyone's still got their hands up. I'm going to go for the one right on the back row up there. There's a lot of pressure on this moment now.
It's actually not a question. It's a little message for Hal. I was very lucky to be sitting next to Julia Mackenzie this afternoon, who was the head judge at the Noel Coward Theatre. We had the student performer of the year, Stephen Sondheim, the most wonderful, wonderful singers. And I mentioned to her that I was coming here this evening, and she said, Hal Prince, she nearly went into tears. The most amazing man I ever worked with in my life. And she showed me a beautiful little bracelet that you gave her. Do you remember that?
You know what's terrible? I heard my name, and I know you.
I'll give you the headline. She
Go
met
ahead.
Julie Mackenzie this afternoon at the Stephen
Where?
Sondheim Student Song of the Year, and Julie mentioned a bracelet that you gave to her.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
She sent you love and kisses.
Look, that lady is everything, just everything. She gave me on the opening night of that show a piece of Staffordshire of Hamlet with the head in his hand. Alas, poor Yorick. And it's a pride of place on my desk right now, and that was one of the great experiences of my life, and knowing her is everything.
Hal, if you had to choose, I guess it's a bit like choosing a favourite child, but if you had to choose one experience or one show that was your favourite experience, which one would it be? It's a really hard one.
There are a bunch of them. You know, it's a lot of years and a lot of shows. Evita would be among them. Company would be among them. Follies. The one that's still running, of course. It's been a very, very fortunate life.
Yeah. It's been an absolute honour to have you here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Angelo Jevon.
Thank you. Thank you, Hal. You were great.
You're wonderful. It's very nice.
There you go, Hal.